One of the immediate and tangible benefits that mindfulness practice can provide for anyone is a place of refuge from the onslaught of what's going on around us. It's only temporary and it's only virtual. It's not going to make anything go away or change externally, but we can find ways to be in the world that we are assaulted by what happens around us, and we can find ways to be in the world where we are protected from all that. By all means, encounter the outer world the way you need to. I'm not suggesting we do anything but follow the guidelines of the professionals in public health that are giving us instruction on what to do about how we interact with one another, how we take care of our personal hygiene, and the appropriate way to respond to the public emergency that we're now a part of. I'm not talking about changing any of that. Do whatever is appropriate and necessary and wise and helpful and legal to be done, okay? And on top of that, there are internal moves that we can make that are more or less helpful in these situations. So our internal life is composed also of two parts. One part is thinking. We think about the world. We create a kind of story. We create a context, a kind of macro narrative, if you will. That is to say, we situate ourselves in time. We know what day of the week it is, usually, and what hour of the day. We situate ourselves in space. We know where we are on a map of our planet and our country and our neighborhood. And we know labels and words and language and concepts we use constantly to help us maintain this narrative. And that's important. There's nothing wrong with that. That's an important part of what it means to be human. It's essential for all our problem-solving skills and storytelling skills and so forth. But if you look carefully at the inner world, that's only one part of what our experience consists of: thinking about things, using language, using concepts, using words. A whole nother component of our inner life is coming entirely through the senses. In other words, we have 5 senses that are constantly bringing in information. And for the mind to be aware of that information before thinking about it is a big part of who we are and what we do internally. So with eyes, we see visual forms, shapes and colors and so forth. With our ears, we hear sounds, of course. We have a nose and tongue, which provide us information about smells and tastes, odors and flavors. Then we have a body filled with sensory receptors, able to discern all kinds of bodily sensations, both external ones on our skin and internally, within our body. And those 5 operate independently of the mind. The mind is a 6th sense. It's a 6th way of taking in information, often, from memory or from imagination, processing that information and then responding. But the 5 primary senses take in information in real time, immediately, and directly from the world. So my point is simply this. All of the troubles we face, all the dangers, the fears, the concerns that we have are based on the thinking process of the mind. When we imagine what might happen or could happen or is going to happen, or what we remember when we remember something that was difficult or challenging or traumatic, the mind is constantly swinging into the past and the future, creating this macro story, this narrative about who we are, what our world consists of, what's happening to us. And a lot of that thinking can feel quite oppressive. This is where we worry and have anxiety about what could happen or is going to happen. This is where we feel fear from what has happened to us before and feel affected by it. But when we're purely in the senses, in the other five senses, when we are either seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, or touching, we can only be in the present moment. We can't be in the past or the future. We can imagine a sound, we can remember a sound that we heard yesterday, but now that's a thought. That's not the actual direct hearing. And the same thing with all the other senses. In other words, what usually happens is we sense something, either we see or hear or touch or smell or taste something, and then we think about it, often multiple times for a long time. And then we sense something else, maybe through a different sense door, and then we think about that. This is all natural. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem comes, however, when the thinking modality kind of takes over and proliferates to a point where it really is not only dominant, but even sometimes relentless. And at times of special challenge like this, times of stress, times of danger, times of care, that thinking mind tends to go into a high mode. Now, again, this is useful. By all means, use your thinking mind to strategically situate yourself in the world and do what's most appropriate and most helpful to your own well-being and the well-being of others. But what I mean by mindfulness practice offering a refuge is that the practices of mindfulness train us to turn away from the thinking function temporarily and put our attention, our awareness, our consciousness instead on the other five sensual modalities. So when you are out of your senses and into your mental construction of the world, it can, in times like this, be very oppressive. It's scary, it's dangerous, it's, threatening. But if we can take a break from thinking about things all the time and making excursions into the primary data of our senses, of our sensory experience, that becomes a refuge. It becomes a safe harbor, becomes a quiet place, a safe place, where we're not assailed by these thoughts of what might happen or could happen or is happening. It's not running away, it's just taking a break. Ideally, we're in both modalities. We're sensing things part of the time, we're thinking about them part of the time. That's healthy. When we are overthinking things all the time, however, that's what leads to stress. Stress and pressure, anxieties, compulsions, addictions, these largely come from the mental world that we construct for ourselves. And so mindfulness practice gives us the ability, if only for 5 minutes a day, or 20 minutes at a time, or one day a week, to just make a conscious choice that we're going to step out of the macro narrative of what's going on around us and step into using our mind more fully and completely to embrace the actual effervescence of what's coming to us from the world through our senses. And there's a number of ways that we're going to explore for how to do that. But the idea is that going into the inner world of direct sensory experience provides a temporary refuge, at least, from the onslaught of endless news reports and updates and so forth. It's healthy for people to sleep at night, to rest when they're working, and for the mind generally to have some respite from its perpetual engagement with the outer world. And that's where mindfulness can really help a lot.